In 1993, the Central Intelligence Agency quietly declassified thousands of documents under pressure from the Freedom of Information Act. Most of them were dry, translations of foreign newspapers, technical intelligence, scattered press clippings. But among them sat a file that looked more like the opening of a horror movie than an intelligence digest. A translation of a Ukrainian newspaper carried through Russian news services and ultimately catalogued into the CIA's archive. The claim? That a detachment of Soviet soldiers had fired on a low-flying unidentified object, shot it down, and then been annihilated in a way that defies biology. The words are chilling, that a bright sphere emerged from the wreck, and in the aftermath, nearly 24 soldiers were turned into stone. Let's start with what is real. The file is real. It can be found today in the CIA's own electronic reading room, under the category of UFO-related documents. It is not a blog, it is not a rumor passed hand to hand, it is a government archive of a translated foreign report, that's the fact. And this is where our story begins. The original source was a Ukrainian newspaper. It was reprinted by a Russian service, then collected and translated by American intelligence. The language itself is clinical, almost detached. It claims 23 Soviet soldiers were involved. 5 survived. The rest were described as having their bodies hardened into stone. That is the literal wording. Hardened. No chemical analysis, no photographs, no medical records, just words carried through layers of translation. And the CIA, rather than dismissing it as a curiosity, logged it, archived it, and preserved it. The question is why? To understand that, we need to look at the context. The late Cold War was filled with rumors of extraordinary encounters. Soviet troops stationed in remote parts of the Union often reported strange lights, aerial intrusions, and unexplained craft. Sometimes these were Western aircraft probing defenses. Sometimes they were misidentifications, but mixed into the chatter were stories that resisted easy explanation. Reports of objects neutralizing missiles, of aircraft shadowed by luminous spheres, of radar contacts that vanished into thin air. The CIA, the KGB, and the GRU all gathered such reports. Sometimes they were cataloged as folklore, sometimes they were studied for patterns, and sometimes, as in this case, they were filed away, half believed, half dismissed. What does it mean to be turned to stone? On the face of it, the phrase sounds mythic, like Medusa in Greek legend, a being whose gaze could petrify soldiers where they stood. But in a military intelligence context, it could be metaphor. It could describe calcification of tissue under radiation. It could describe thermal flash burns that stiffened bodies into statuesque forms. It could describe corpses so desiccated they looked like stone. The words of translation matter. Hardened in Ukrainian or Russian may not mean literal petrification. It may mean rigid, stiff, paralyzed, burned. But the English translation, the one filed at Langley, chose stone. And that choice carries weight. Mainstream scholars dismiss the account. There is no corroborating evidence, no photographs of the site, no medical analysis of survivors, no independent confirmation in Soviet military archives. Skeptics argue it was tabloid fodder, dressed up in sensational language and funneled into Western press digests as an example of Soviet UFO mania, and they may be right. But here's where integrity requires us to slow down. Because there is something undeniable. The CIA did not throw it in the trash. They logged it, they translated it, they stored it. For a bureaucracy that discards noise by the ton, why keep this story? Why give it shelf space? Let's pause and compare. During the Cold War, the CIA and Air Force both ran programs to collect UFO reports. Project Blue Book in the United States, separate classified collection in the Soviet Union. Most cases were cataloged, explained, or quietly buried. But a handful, the radar visuals, the pilot encounters, the multi-witness cases, were retained and studied. The Stone Soldiers file sits in that same folder. It may be nonsense, it may be folklore, but intelligence officers thought it valuable enough to keep. That fact alone is intriguing. Now let's examine parallels. Around the world, ancient myths speak of beings that could petrify. In Mesopotamia, there are accounts of gods who wielded burning eyes that could freeze armies. In the Bible, Lot's wife is turned into a pillar of salt for looking back at a forbidden vision. In Central America, legends tell of shining beings who froze warriors with light, and in Greek lore, the Gorgons. Every culture has a petrification myth, usually dismissed as metaphor, but always echoing the same theme: a sudden transformation from living flesh to inert stone. What if those myths preserve garbled memories of real encounters? encounters with weapons or phenomena we barely comprehend. Modern science has its own unsettling hints. High-intensity radiation can cause rapid calcification of tissue. Plasma discharges can flash burn bodies into rigid forms. Shock waves from high-energy events can stiffen corpses into contorted, statue-like shapes. There are even rare natural disasters where victims appear frozen, encased in ash or mineral. Think of Pompeii, where volcanic ash captured people mid-stride, frozen forever. To an untrained eye, those ash-hardened bodies look like stone. Could something like that explain the Soviet story? A natural phenomenon mistaken for a weapon, or something else entirely? Alternative researchers go further. Some suggest the sphere of light described in the file was not an occupant, but a weapon, an autonomous defense system deployed by the craft. That when the soldiers fired on the UFO, the sphere retaliated, discharging energy that killed most and paralyzed the rest. Others speculate about exotic technologies, directed energy beams, sonic weapons, plasma fields. Still others, reaching into the fringe, suggest an alien biology so far removed from ours that simple contact could transmute matter. All speculation, all unproven. But the fact remains, the file exists, and the words are preserved. Why has no one chased it? Because journalists need hard evidence, because historians need corroborating documents, because scientists need material samples, and none exist. The file is an orphan, a single translation with no siblings, no follow-up, no photographs. To run a mainstream headline saying Soviet soldiers turned to stone would be career suicide, so it sits ignored. Mentioned in UFO blogs, occasionally surfacing in viral social media threads, but never seriously investigated. And yet, here we are, still talking about it, still curious. Because part of us knows that intelligence agencies don't archive fairy tales. They archive data points, and sometimes, hidden in the noise, the unbelievable is preserved alongside the trivial. What if the stone soldier story was not literal petrification, but a garbled report of something else? What if it was a cover story for a weapons accident? What if it was a metaphor for chemical exposure, or a failed experiment in directed energy? And what if the UFO itself was incidental, or the perfect scapegoat? These are the questions that keep the file alive. Now let's step into the broader pattern. The CIA and other agencies have long collected extraordinary accounts without endorsing them. They catalog folklore, myths, even outright hoaxes because intelligence is about perception as much as reality. If Soviet troops believed they fought a UFO, that mattered. If a story of petrification circulated among military families, that mattered. If adversaries might weaponize rumor to sow fear, that mattered. So the file could be nothing more than cultural intelligence. A record of what people believed, not what actually happened. But here's the haunting question. Why was it declassified in the first place? Why let the public see a story so wild? Was it a mistake? Was it a deliberate release to muddy the waters? Or was it simply part of a bureaucratic dump, overlooked because no one took it seriously? This is where we tip our hat to conspiracy circles. Some argue the story is true and buried. Others argue it was planted as disinformation, a seed of confusion to mask real encounters. Still others see it as a psychological operation, a test to see how the public reacts to outrageous claims. None of these are proven, but they are possibilities that keep the file alive in alternative history. So where does that leave us? On one hand, a cold fact. The CIA archived a translation of a foreign newspaper that claimed Soviet soldiers were turned to stone by a UFO. On the other, the absence of evidence. No bodies, no photos, no labs, no corroboration. Caught between the myth of Medusa and the bureaucracy of Langley. The integrity of HAlt demands we be clear. This is not proof of petrified soldiers. It is proof that intelligence agencies sometimes keep stories that sound impossible. It is proof that archives preserve mysteries, whether true or false. And it is proof that the line between folklore and fact is sometimes paper thin. So, what do we do with it? We don't dismiss it. We don't swallow it whole. We study it, contextualize it, and ask better questions. Because the real story may not be about soldiers frozen into stone. It may be about why governments catalog the impossible, what they fear, what they hope to learn, and what they hope we never notice. In the end, the stone soldiers may be nothing more than words on a page, but words have power, and when those words sit inside a CIA archive, they carry weight beyond rumor. They remind us that history is not just what happened, it is also what people believed happened. And sometimes, in the shadows between fact and myth, we glimpse the outline of truths too strange to accept. That is the story of the Soviet stone soldiers. A declassified file, a bizarre claim, and a mystery that endures not because it is proven, but because it is remembered. I am Cody of HAlt, and this is the mystery they would rather you forget.